Hello there, and thank you so much for stopping by. This is Carol Patterson, your neighbor and Bay Ridge historian with Jane McWilliams, here to say that you are standing right now on Tolly Point Bluff, exactly where a grand Victorian hotel once stood within a thriving resort and amusement park, a resort with an amazing story. To learn more, please find a nearby bench, sit down, relax, and come with me to time travel into summers long ago at Bay Ridge. Let's step back in time to imagine Annapolis in the late 1870s, a small city surrounded by forest and farmland. Picture a large farm of approximately 387 acres owned by the Steele family at Tolly Point. This peaceful Steele farmland was about to undergo a dramatic transformation. It took place during the years of peace, prosperity, and leisure time that followed the Civil War. These were the lavish years of grand hotels, big railroads, of luxury steamboats, of amazing advances in electricity. Thanks to new technology, passenger and freight steamships, with flags flying and smokestacks streaming, crisscrossed the bay on regular schedules of the great steamship packet lines, Weems, Tolchester, and the Maryland Steamship Company. Bay resorts such as Betterton, Browns Grove, and Tolchester became accessible and popular. At the same time, railroads linked up with the steamship lines to transport people and goods with a speed and efficiency never before possible. Ladies in high-necked blouses, long skirts and bustles, and men in knobby straw hats and high-starched collars, men with money in their pockets, were ready to vacation on a scale never before dreamed. These were the 1880s through the gay 90s. It is not surprising that the Steele farm at Tolly Point overlooking the bay was chosen for a resort with a grand hotel and amusement park. It was a perfect destination for vacationers coming by train or steamboat. The Maryland Republican from 1880 through 1883 and the Annapolis Evening Capital from 1884 through 1903 recorded step by step how the resort came to be. Their journalists also provided eyewitness details in describing resort events and happenings week by week and year by year during the 20 years the resort flourished. So how did this all come about? Well, an energetic Annapolis entrepreneur, James Van Sant, just thought it would be a great idea. He became the front man for the Bay Ridge Company that developed the resort. He purchased, in parcels, 387 acres of land from the Steele family, with financial backing from the B&O Railroad. He had the power of the press solidly behind him and the full support of excited Annapolis residents. Under his management, the hotel was built on the bluff, as well as a steamship pier to welcome vacationers by water. Restaurant pavilion, dance pavilion, bathhouses followed, and suddenly, boom, by 1880, Bay Ridge had morphed into the Queen Resort of the Chesapeake. From earliest years, the resort drew large daily crowds of vacationers, in the thousands, most arriving by steamboat. Here, vacationers pose on the Bay Drive beach with the steamboat pier in the background. This clearly was long before leisure clothes and sportswear. Train transportation to the resort was the next challenge. Van Sant to the rescue again. In 1886, he spearheaded the construction of a connecting rail line from Annapolis that carried vacationers to Bay Ridge. During those years before the age of the automobile, vacationers traveled to Annapolis by train on either the Washington, Baltimore, and Annapolis line or the rival Baltimore and Annapolis Short Line Railroad. Many Baltimoreans preferred the Short Line, which offered a businessman's special to Bay Ridge in the late afternoon, on tracks that extended down the Severn River's scenic northern shore to bring vacationers from the Camden Station in Baltimore to the Bladen Street Depot in Annapolis. From Annapolis, passengers then boarded the Bay Ridge and Annapolis connecting line to Bay Ridge. This single-track railroad passed along what is today Amos Garrett Boulevard, crossed a trestle bridge over Spa Creek, and then continued through fields and farmland for about 4 miles to the Bay Ridge Station, located in 1887 at a spot directly behind the hotel, a convenience welcomed by guests with heavy luggage. How popular was train service to Bay Ridge? Well, 65 passenger coaches brought people from D.C. throughout the day for the 4th of July in 1891, when 10,000 people were at the resort. Notices of the train schedule appeared regularly in the Evening Capital, along with notices of attractions and events. Reporters covered resort happenings on a weekly basis. Excitement flourished. County roads then were rutted, narrow, and often muddy. Annapolitans clamored for easy access to Bay Ridge by horse and buggy. James Van Sant convinced the county of the need to build a new road from Annapolis along the water's edge to the resort. Begun in 1886, it was finished in 1887. It was called Bay Shore Drive. A section of this road still exists in Eastport with its sign right next to the Annapolis Maritime Museum. For this road, 2 new bridges were constructed over Back Creek and the Lake Ogleton Channel. Bayshore Drive was a huge boon for the horse and buggy businesses. Here we see one of the countless ads offering services. It happens to be Van Sant's. Here his father heads off on a call. Similarly, the resort was also great news for the boat hiring businesses. Ads abound offering sailing trips to Bay Ridge. The most popular by far was that of Captain William H. Burtis, whose historic home is now owned by the city of Annapolis. Burtis's sailing outings aboard his schooners, sloops, and catboats often made the society pages of the news. Burtis with a sailing party lands in Bay Ridge. Notice they are not wearing life jackets. This was long before sailing togs and boating safety courses, and it isn't likely they knew how to swim either. The Emma Giles was a beloved steamer, bringing people to Bay Ridge not only from Annapolis, she also transported people and goods to and from other mid-bay ports. The small steamer Jane Moseley offered regularly scheduled trips to Bay Ridge from the foot of Prince George Street, as seen in this ad. Here she is, the Jane Moseley. Annapolis Sunday school children came to Bay Ridge in the hundreds in combined groups with their teachers on the Jane Moseley. Each child carried a picnic basket. They were dubbed the Basket Brigade by the crew. These children are playing a game called Over Under at the resort. Sunday school girls from First Presbyterian Church took pride in their maypole at Bay Ridge on July 19, 1901. The Evening Capital reports that the Presbyterian contingent were the first to the picnic grounds, where a pretty little maypole dance with graceful maneuvers was executed by the scholars of Miss Lottie Gardner's class. People coming to the resort from Baltimore could purchase for 25 cents a round-trip ticket for train or steamship. They could arrive by steamship and return by rail or the reverse, or just come and go by train or steamship. The most magnificent luxury steamship to Bay Ridge was the Columbia, 262 feet long and 69 feet wide, almost as long as a football field. She was the largest steamer in the world when made. She traveled from Baltimore to Bay Ridge in 1.5 hours on a fixed schedule. First licensed to carry 3,500 passengers, she was refurbished in 1893 to carry 4,000 passengers. She featured band concerts and vaudeville acts on the upper deck. Her captain, John Thomas, was honored for his record of 20 accident-free years at the helm. That does not mean that every trip aboard the Columbia was a joy. In gloriously Victorian wording, the Baltimore Herald describes a rare incident in which the Columbia was caught in a storm, creating panic among the passengers. No one was able to control the frightened crowd, and above the din of battle waged by the elements could be heard the prayers and even the curses of the frightened. Women and children fainted, and the stoutest hearts on the great boat quaked with fear. The boat was completely at the mercy of the waves. The engines were stopped, and in the darkness of the hour, the billows rose high around her. The rain came down in torrents. After the storm had somewhat spent itself, the passengers were carried into the staterooms by the crew, and everything done for their comfort. Never has such a crowd of sick, frightened, and thoroughly drenched people been landed at Bay Ridge. Many refused to return by boat. 3 extra trains were sent down, and about 1,000 of the frightened excursionists returned that way. Columbia at the Bay Ridge Pier. On the bay, very long piers were constructed at ports of call to accommodate the deep drafts of large steamboats coming to land where waters are shallow. The Bay Ridge Pier was originally 1,000 feet in length. But over and over, the very deep-drafted Empire State seen here ran aground just short of the pier with passengers on board. Frustrated passengers could hear the music on shore, see the pennants flying, watch the swimmers, but not join in. It made the papers. The Bay Ridge Company was embarrassed. When the season closed, 200 feet were added to the pier, solving the problem. The pier itself was covered for sun protection. You can see side projections for crabbing and fishing. Vacationers climbed stairs to the hotel. A stationary steam engine beside the stairs elevated the luggage of overnight guests 60 feet to the top. It was also used to steam the hard crabs caught at the pier. In April 1974, during a record low tide, many pieces of broken Bay Ridge china and soda bottles with copper stoppers were discovered in the sand at the base of the old pier stumps. For 1 year, 1890 through 1891, Bay Ridge was designated a bona fide commercial port. It was the Western Shore link in a consolidated line of trains from Baltimore to Ocean City. The pier and its dispatch office was located south of the steamship pier, just south of what is today Mayo Avenue. Here we see the ferry steamer Thames River. She waits to take on a train and its passengers bound for Claiborne on the eastern shore. The trip from Baltimore to Ocean City took 6 hours. The view from Arundel on the Bay. It shows the Bay Ridge Resort Complex and both piers. In the foreground, we are looking at a single train track for a small private train called the Summer Cars that brought people to and from Arundel on the Bay. It consisted of 1 locomotive and 4 little red cars. Also, we see Annapolis resident Margaret Randall preparing to take a photo. In the middle ground, we see the ferry steamer pier, and in the distance, the Columbia waits at the pier in front of the hotel. The hotel itself had 4 stories and was Victorian in style, complete with gingerbread ornamentation. It offered overnight accommodations for several hundred people, expensive meals, and alcoholic beverages not allowed in the rest of the resort. It featured small-scale dances, card parties, and musicales. The hotel arranged sailing parties and hay rides for its patrons. The grounds in front of the hotel were laid out with gravel walks and flower beds, including an annual bed in the shape of the steamship Columbia. Patrons stand in front of the hotel, and we can see the boardwalk that ran the length of the bluff. Gravel paths connected the various buildings, and the entire area was planted with thousands of shrubs and shade trees. Gazebos of picturesque architecture were placed within gardens intended for elegant picnics. At night, the boardwalk and garden paths were lit by state-of-the-art electric street lamps. Lights also twinkled in a long line from the pier below. To the right of the hotel, facing the bay, was the enormous 200-foot-long restaurant pavilion. It was highly visible from the water, with red pennants flying. It could seat 1,600 diners at a time, served by a crew of 80 waiters and waitresses. Beneath were concessions, an ice cream parlor, a camera obscura, Jolly's Waxworks, a Wargraph, and Mr. Buffum's photography studio. The steps in front served as seating for the band concerts. The band was under the direction of Professor Charles Adams Zimmerman, who was the Naval Academy bandmaster and composer of many marches, including Anchors Aweigh. The band played popular and classical music by day and evening concerts that featured prominent guest soloists and vaudeville acts to entertain weary vacationers waiting for train or steamboat to bear them home. On Sundays, the band only played sacred music at the insistence of the evening capital. Special grand-scale productions of the band attracted large crowds, such as the Grand Jubilee Concert for the 4th of July in 1889, with some 10,000 people at the resort. This concert involved a massed group of glee clubs, 3,000 voices, singing patriotic songs accompanied by the band, the discharge of cannons, and the ringing of mammoth bells. The cannons and bells were brought to Bay Ridge with difficulty from the Naval Academy. After dark, fireworks followed. The bay, with the prospect of getting in the water, was a huge attraction. Continuing right along the bluff, we come to the bathhouses, 600 in total, with hot and cold running salt water. Here, bathing suits could be rented. Sputtering with Victorian moral indignation, the Evening Capital editor declared them indecent, writing, "The company now managing Bay Ridge is entitled to a great deal of credit, but there is one real nuisance which should be positively quickly abated if the company proposes to continue to invite respectable organizations and people as its guests. I refer to the prohibition of inappropriate bathing suits. None but woolen material of good texture and full suit should be allowed. The incomplete and very thin suits used there now are positively indecent. They should not be permitted at a shore where ladies and gentlemen bathe together." There was a great deal of earnest criticism of this nasty feature. The company will probably see that it is abated, for in its deserved success, it will doubtless recognize that this is due to a decent public opinion. By the end of the month, the Bay Ridge management had corrected the problem and received praise from the editor for doing so. Many preferred to bring their own swimsuits. The cliff in front of the bathhouses was terraced and sodded. 6 water slides with toboggans were constructed from the top of the bluff down for a thrilling ride 700 feet far out into the water where lifeguards were stationed, just in case. A covered walkway to the beach provided shade and privacy for ladies going down the cliff to the beach. We have no photo, but there was a dance pavilion on the Tolly Point side of the hotel. There, Professor Auer, dance master, taught the latest dance steps, conducted twice-weekly hops, special moonlight dances, and grand balls. The resort also had a U.S. post office, which opened on February 13, 1899, with a postmaster appointed by President McKinley. Lake Ogleton was a special attraction in itself. Rustic picnic groves and overnight campsites were available. Here, a group relaxes at a picnic site. At the lake, too, sculls and rowboats could be rented from a Mr. Quaid. And there's more. On the inland side of the grounds, there were riding stables, a racetrack with grandstand, a parade field, a baseball diamond, lawn tennis courts, a summer theater for the Bijou Opera Company, and a substantial zoo. Young men posed for Mr. Buffum at the racetrack. The amusement park featured a 75-foot, 20-car Ferris wheel, a replica of the one at the Chicago World's Fair. Also, a merry-go-round, complete with steam organ, playground equipment, and an early form of roller coaster, built on an elevated structure that extended down what is now Lawrence Avenue to Lake Ogleton. It was called a gravity train. Special entertainments ranged from small to large. The bicycle craze was huge. The League of American Wheelmen held regularly scheduled races on the horse track. Sculling races on the lake drew large audiences. Here, a cycling act draws viewers. The cyclist is seen upside down at the top of the loop. Bay Ridge was one of the first amusement parks to have an electric railway or trolley. It consisted of 3 motor cars and 3 trailers, each with 7 benches. Built on the Sprague system by Henry Wellington in 1889, it transported people on a 5-mile loop for a scenic ride around the grounds on its own track. There were 3 covered stations with convenient stops for vacationers traveling to the lake and picnic grounds. The first 2 Anne Arundel County fairs were held at Bay Ridge in August 1888 and 1889. They were a combination agricultural fair and Chesapeake Appreciation Day. This 1888 fair schedule lists some of the events to be held on water and land. The Evening Capital reported a daily parade of farmers and livestock passing through Annapolis to arrive at Bay Ridge via Bayshore Drive. Special buildings were constructed suitable for livestock and farm produce exhibitions, as well as open stables for 30 horses and 50 cattle. The dance pavilion was transformed into additional space for farm exhibitions. The 14-mile workboat race at the fair. This race was preceded by a blessing of the fleet. Known as the Oyster Navy, these sailboats, unique to the Chesapeake, skipjacks, bug-eyes, small schooners, and sloops, were working boats that harvested what seemed then to be an unending plenitude of fish, oysters, and crabs. On the last day of the fair, exhibits were removed from the dance pavilion. The floors were waxed for dancing, Chinese lanterns strung from the ceiling, potted flowers and ferns placed about, all for a concluding fancy dress ball in the evening. The music was produced by the Naval Academy Band. Other special entertainments at Bay Ridge ranged in scope from simple vaudeville and variety acts to extravagant pyrotechnical dramas that drew exceptionally large crowds. These included special dances and highly patriotic concerts and programs of marching drills, target shooting, and field maneuvers during Military Day, and the encampments of the Grand Army of the Republic Civil War veterans. Visiting baseball teams also competed at Bay Ridge, attracting fans to this new sport. Those in search of knowledge and moral uplifting enjoyed the programs of the National Chautauqua Assembly in 1900 and 1901. No photos of these events could be found, but we know that many thousands came daily to see them. Large conventions, societies, and fraternal lodges booked excursions, as well as individuals and families. Here we see a stock certificate. The Bay Ridge Company was always operating lavishly on a shoestring, and as the resort aged, upkeep and maintenance became too costly. So the B&O stopped backing the resort. In 1903, train and steamboat service ceased. The amusement park rides became rusty and unsafe and were closed. Grass grew high around the tracks. Mr. George R. Buffum, the resort photographer, stayed on as the manager and caretaker of the grounds. He arranged campsites for campers. We are looking at Mr. Buffum's home, the only remaining building from the resort. Much the same today. It is now the residence at 15 Barry Avenue, just 1 block behind where you are standing now. On March 3, 1915, tragedy struck the resort. A disastrous fire, fueled by tall dry grasses and a strong wind, raged through Bay Ridge, and buildings, including the hotel, burned to the ground. Only Mr. Buffum's wife Ethel and several farmers were on hand to see the resort's final performance. Mrs. Buffum put her cow and chickens in the house and saved the house by repeated trips to her well for water to saturate the ground. Farmers from nearby Keys Farm came to help. Sadly, all Mr. Buffum's photos, an entire history of the resort, were stored in the hotel and were destroyed, consumed in flames. And so, like Camelot and Brigadoon, Bay Ridge Resort vanished with little left to remind us of its existence at all. But sometimes, walking along the bluff on a moonlit night, you might just hear in a soft summer breeze strains of music from the band.
Bye.